What's up, gangsters? Time for another sort of 10 minutes of technique. This one's going to be on scribing. I have a longer and more detailed video about scribing somewhere in my list of nonsense, but I thought this would be a good one to take a quick look at since I'm doing a lot of it on a current project. So let's check it out. Okay, first things first, a couple of words about materials. I think that the single most important thing about successful scribing is getting good guides in place. There are people who will do some of it freehand, and in certain situations, maybe you have to. And, there are people who definitely can pull that off, but they're about as rare as hen's teeth, and I don't claim to be one of them. So I go to a lot of trouble to make sure that my guides are good and firm. And what I use most of the time is this Haikyuu guide tape. It comes in a couple of different widths, and I have a wider one and a narrow one. Now, there are people who complain about this stuff being transparent and, hard to work with. Look, it is what it is. There aren't a lot of good alternatives. You can use Dymo label tape, which is really much stiffer and does not do well on curves. And when I say curves, I mean curves with the tape. Obviously, you're not going to make a curve that goes in the plane of the tape with something this stiff. That's a whole different subject I'm not even going to get into. For basic scribing, though, you need a straight edge. And sometimes it has to wrap over a complex surface. And having a narrow piece of guide tape works really well for that. At any rate, I like this stuff a lot. You can also use metal guides like this Hasegawa guide, which is useful for doing things like hatches and so forth. But again, for the basics, I use straight guide tape. And I have some favorite scribing tools. I'm not going to go through all of them, but right now my favorite one is this one from MRP. They are best known for all of their wonderful lacquer paints, but they also have a few tools in their lineup, and this is one of them. So with that, let me just set up real quick, and I'm going to show you just some very basic things about the actual scribing process. Okay, scribing is one of those things where technique really does matter. And I can't really explain all the nuances at it. It's one of those things where you really kind of have to develop a feel for it. You also have to decide for yourself what your favorite scribing tool is. Anytime you see somebody saying what the best scribing tool is, just laugh and point because they're silly, and then go buy the one that they like and see if you like it too. It really just comes down to feel. Different people hold them in different ways. They prefer to pull or push, and different scribers make different types of lines. I have 4 or 5 of them, and I'll pull any one of them out depending on what it is that I'm trying to do. But for my basic straight panel line, this MRP one is my favorite. This is the medium width one, by the way. Now, one habit that I'm still trying to break is going too heavy and too deep. You really just want to let the scriber do the work for you. If it's dragging, and it is because this sample piece has some Vallejo varnish on it, and I already screwed up, which is good because I want to show you what to do about that. Anyway, a really good scriber is going to give you a little curlicue of material as you're going along. That tells you that it's cutting instead of gouging, and that's what you want to see. And a couple of light passes will get you the panel line that you need. You don't have to just really hog into it. So once you've got that, there you go. That's a nice tight panel line. But look, I already screwed up, okay? See there where it jumped away from the tape? Right. Let me point to it. Right there. See that? Now normally what you want to do when that happens is you want to instantly stop, and the first thing you can try is to switch directions, because what happens now is you've got a little side rail there that your scriber is going to want to follow, and it's typically just going to get worse. But that's also why you want to really use light pressure and use more passes, because when you make that mistake, if you're using light pressure, that means it's not too deep, and you can immediately go back and deal with that. And I'm going to show you how. So I switched directions, and everything is going pretty well. And now my actual line is enough deeper that I'll be able to handle that little mistake. Now another thing that is good when you're scribing is to help you keep from getting little overruns, like where you slip beyond the panel line you want to go to, is to work towards another panel line or a gap. That way your scriber just naturally stops in the right place, and you don't have to worry about overruns. So it's also good to work against or toward your guide if you've got enough pieces of tape that you can lay down. So if I want to make a panel line at a right angle to the one that I've already created here, then what I want to do is, before I pull up that piece of tape, come along and add my second piece. And immediately go and make that panel line. And again, I'm going to work towards the piece of tape because that gives me a natural backstop. But that can also create another problem. Now this silly varnish just does not want to cooperate. And I normally would not be scribing on top of some varnish, obviously, but it's kind of funny because you can see that as ancient as this varnish is on this paint mule, it's still kind of flexible, which is one of the reasons why I would never recommend anybody use the Vallejo metal color varnish. Anyway, the thing that I was trying to point out is, while it's good to be able to work towards that piece of tape, it creates another problem. The thing that makes a scriber blade cut effectively is the angle of attack. If you get it up too high, it's not going to cut effectively. Same thing if you get it too low. So now, if I want to come from this direction, I have to reach over the fuselage here, and I can't really get my blade to lay down at the right angle. And so you may not have any choice but to work in a less than ideal direction. And so you just have to be careful and don't go too far. But I'm about to show you what to do if that happens. All right? So let me yank these pieces of guide tape off of here. And you can see that I've got a couple of pretty nice little panel lines there. See? Nice and crisp. And look, this is the thing with scribing. The lines have to be crisp and tight, because any mistakes that you make are going to show up when you get your final coat of paint on there, and especially if you use a high contrast panel line wash. So you have to take the time to get your guides down and fix mistakes if you make them. So let's say that I was using a different tool and I came along here and oh shit, I scribed way too far and I made a horrible scratch. All right, the first thing that you should do is sand it out. Just immediately grab a sander and just work as carefully as you can not to disturb any of your other work. And see if you can get rid of that problem with a little bit of light sanding. All right, if that doesn't work, then what I do is I keep this handy bottle of brushable, I shouldn't say it's brushable. This is actually just some old All-Clad 309 microfiller primer that I don't trust for anything else anymore. It let me down. That's a whole other story. But I keep it around in this bottle because it's very handy. It's slightly thick, and so especially with this brush that's in this Tamiya bottle, I have an instant brushable filler material that I can use very precisely to go and make a spot fill. And given that I'm generally working my panel lines on top of a layer of primer or on bare plastic, this is really easy to do and really effective. And you can even do it right next to a panel line where you've got a mistake like I made before. If you get a little bit of it in the actual panel line, no big deal, because it'll kind of just settle down in there and it won't make much difference. But it'll give you just enough material that you can come back and very easily sand that down and fill in your mistake. And I'll show you an example of that on the current project I'm working on. This is my Accurate Miniatures B25 Mitchell, which has all kinds of challenging scribing situations. And you can see right here, if you look really close, if the camera will focus for me, where I had an overrun on that one panel line. And I already filled it with that brushable primer and then sanded it back down, and I'm in good shape. Oh, who is calling me? That's the problem with being live. Go away. Okay, so anyway, that's just a quick and easy way to make those little fixes. And I have a number of those little spot fills scattered all around here that you can't see because they've been filled and sanded down. And I do a lot of spot priming to check my work along the way. That may seem tedious, but it's just part of the process where you absolutely have to check your work, and it's worthwhile because it's going to show up if it doesn't look good, and it's much better to find out with some spot priming than with your last coat of paint. Like this, for example, this piece right here is a separate insert that has a horrible joint all the way around it. So this has all been filled with sprue goo, which is just dissolved styrene sprue in Tamiya Extra Thin, and then sanded and blended in, and then re-scribed. And I use the sprue goo because it scribes like real styrene, because it is. It scribes much better than any other filler material. But anyway, that crisp panel line work there is the result of the process that I just showed you. And you can see with this kind of weird curvature here where this guide tape is really nice, because it will conform pretty well over a weird curve like that. And as long as you're careful anyway, it typically will not pull paint up when you remove it. So it's good for stuff like that. It's good for situations like this, where I had to deepen this panel line a little bit to show the split in the landing gear doors, and I needed a guide that would wrap over this hump and let me scribe that confidently. So again, having good guide materials is really important. And you can see right here where I had a little bit of a mistake that I've filled already with that primer. And now just very quickly with this 400 grit UMP sanding stick, Just very quickly rub that down, and now you can see where the mistake was, but once I reprime that, it won't show up anymore because it's been filled in. So there we go. So there you go, kind of some basic tips about basic scribing. I hope that helps and you found it informative. As always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.